I'm joining you from Cincinnati for their 2017 User Con. It's one of the bigger user cons throughout the year. John, you've driven 9 hours to come here. So that's a big deal. We get into that and why and the whole DevOps conversation. So can we go ahead and do introductions? John?
So I'm John Hildebrand. I am, I guess, kind of a jack of all trades type of thing, community guy, deep dive expert stuff into things for all things like people and process for DevOps, and all the way into some of the technology stacks on top of it.
I'm Byron Schaller. I'm the Chief Technologist for Round Tower Technologies, focusing a lot on use tech architecture and transformation.
So I've had both Byron and John on the podcast talking about DevOps, enterprise architecture. We're going to combine the conversation a little bit and talk about kind of when the CIO picks up a magazine on a flight or reads one of my blog posts and says, you know what, we're going to do DevOps and we're going to digitally transform our organization from people process all the way to technology. So, John, we're going to start out with you and ask the question, what are some of the common themes that a CIO or executive will pick up in a trade rag or something and say, you know what, that sounds very doable, very achievable, best of intentions, but they kind of run into like the first major snafu?
Well, a lot of things that you get into, especially on the DevOps side of the equation, is this concept of like forcing collaboration, say, between all the persons involved. Well, we're human beings. Some of us are oil, some of us are water. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily work to that particular advantage. So just expecting to be able to, say, mandate culture from the top level down, that's not going to set any organization up for any sort of success right from the get-go. A lot of the times that I see when you see failures, which you probably don't see inside of those CIO magazines as there's the failure aspects of it, is that a lot of the times the culture and the people in the process side has to bubble up from the lower parts of the org chart up into and branch out and try to encapsulate more and more of the org. So sometimes people try to go from the top and push it down. And if you've ever had a culture mandated upon you, it doesn't really work out that way.
So culture mandating just doesn't really end well. Any specific examples you want to give, either theoretical or in real life, or where, you know what, we mandated dev and the infrastructure teams now will become a dev team and...
Well, one of the other common fallacies, just because you put the term DevOps in somebody's title doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they are. So one of the places I used to work at, a large healthcare software company, they tried the approach of trying to merge those teams together, but what they forgot to do was actually try to integrate those teams a little bit better together. Just because you make teams go to the same meetings, after a while, some people just stop going to those particular meetings. So they didn't really interweave everything that they do during the course of the day between some of those groups involved, so that they can actually maybe build a little cohesion working forward towards that business goal that they're trying to achieve.
So, Byron, let's pick up on that theme. One of the outputs of a group like that is, you know what, now you shall use a process in which the infrastructure team now develops creates a platform that developers can now consume. In theory, that sounds great. If I have a VMware team that's used to providing platforms in the form of VMs to developers, it's not that big of a stretch to say that they can now provide something like a PaaS, whatever that PaaS is. It can be OpenShift, PKS. Go down the list. They can now manage that thing and deliver it to a developer. Where does that fall down, if at all?
So I like what John said about forcing collaboration and this whole idea of mandating this transformation. So how people usually do that is with a tool. They buy a tool or they buy a platform. And what they're lacking is the process. And when you don't have a process that you're buying a tool or building a tool to adopt to, you're going to default to whatever process that lends itself to enforce. Mm-hmm. And if that works for your workflow, you're very lucky. It's probably not going to. And so you're going to find workarounds. People are going to go outside the system and use the email channels that they're comfortable with. And that's where things start to fall apart. Now you magnify that by saying, okay, now we're going to go to, containers for a dev platform, whatever you want to do. What happens is kind of twofold. On the ops side, there's no operationalizing process around that. They have their virtualization processes or there's really DCI processes that they're running. But these new things like container lifecycle management and how you do self-service to devs and not just admins for deploying applications, all that probably doesn't exist. And until those processes exist, all the tooling in the world is not going to fix your problem.
So, a bunch of questions, but let's focus on one in that. So, I locked in this concept right before we started recording. We talked about this whole move that magically, if I take a monolithic application, run it in a container, I've now modernized my application. Even let's say we're starting from a greenfield and we're developing a new application. One of the challenges I can easily see is say that, we're going to start building applications built on microservices. How do you even start to enforce that from a developer-centric perspective? Developer writes code, and if he wants to create like a SAML and deploy his own SAML or his own access control solution, what's to stop him from doing it? Like, I'm comfortable doing it this way. Why use a centralized SAML instance?
Architecture and the proper use of it. So don't just start writing code, write architecture. Have someone who understands the business process laid out in pseudocode or however you want to do it and say, here's what we're trying to do. Then you break that down, because this whole idea of taking your monolith and putting it into a container is a kind of fallacy of misplacing the value. You think the value is in the container itself, and it's not. The value is in the decoupling. It's in the event-driven data. It's in those things where you're going to drive that value. So build those into your architecture, and then use that architecture as a guideline to write guidelines for your devs. Say if you write a service, it must have these things. It must list its consumers and its dependents. It must give open. Well, however you want to do it, but write the rules and then give the rules to the devs and say, write whatever you want to, meet the business goal, and follow these guidelines. And if they all conform to that and agree to that contract, which is really, it is a contract, that will succeed.
And then the way that we measure that contract and reinforce that contract or enforce that contract is through things like code reviews,
peer review, yes.
engineer reviews to say that, hey, here's the contract we all agreed to. Are we following that contract? And that helps with some of the culture change. It doesn't dictate culture. You still got to get in there and do the hard work. And but it is a start. So I hope you guys enjoyed this look behind the scenes, behind the thou shall create a DevOps team, and then after that everything magically happens. Some of the pitfalls and some of the gadgets. Where can folks find you guys online, on the web, etc.?
I can be found on Twitter. It's at SnoopJ123. So blog at snoopj.wordpress.com.
We've found at Byron Schaller on all the things, mainly the Twitters, metalworker.io for a blog I write sometimes, and the Cut the Noise podcast.
All right, and that's it for me, the CTO Advisor. You can find me on the web at CTO Advisor on Twitter, thectoadvisor.com. Subscribe to the podcast. Both of these guys appeared on some great podcasts. Maybe we'll even get one in doing a show. Talk to you guys next CTO Daily Dose.